On April 17, 1883, at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, a meeting was held to form the College Lawn Tennis Association. Delegates from Amherst, Brown, Yale, and Harvard participated and were joined a few months later by Princeton, Pennsylvania, Columbia, and Williams. The group elected officers, adopted a constitution, and resolved to enter their champions in a collegiate championship tennis tournament at Hartford that October. Harvard players won the singles and doubles in this first collegiate championship. Over the next three-quarters of a century, American college tennis grew significantly in the number of programs and the quality of play, with the best collegians going on to represent their country in Davis Cup competition and achieving great success on the international tennis scene. The Intercollegiate Tennis Coaches Association was founded in 1956. Its primary goal was, and remains, to foster and encourage the playing of intercollegiate tennis in accordance with the greatest tradition of sportsmanship and consistent with the general objectives of higher education. The Intercollegiate Tennis Coaches Association would eventually assume a dynamic leadership role as the governing body of this brave new world of college tennis.
Hi, I'm Patrick McEnroe. American college tennis would not be the internationally recognized success it is today without the Intercollegiate Tennis Association. Naturally, I was well aware that the ITA was a governing body of college tennis when I began my studies and my tennis career at Stanford University in 1984. But during my four-year undergraduate years, I came to realize how much I benefited along with my tennis teammates and all the men and women, collegiate varsity tennis players, from the special structure and programs created by the ITA, national, regional championships, rankings of teams, singles, doubles, awards programs, honoring student athletes for scholarship, sportsmanship, leadership, and of course, community service. In fact, it was really only many years later, and with the insight provided by my years on the Pro Tour, as the Davis Cup captain for a decade, and as director of player development for a number of years for the USTA, and also as a longtime tennis broadcaster, that I fully appreciated how much my years in college tennis had contributed to my career and how much the ITA was a reason for this. The story of the ITA and its role in growing and shaping college tennis is very important to tell. And without doubt, the best person to tell this tale is none other than David Benjamin, who coached the Princeton men's tennis team for 26 years. And for many of those years, and 15 years after his coaching retirement in 2000, served as a president and executive director of the ITA, and was the architect of our modern world of college tennis.
The Intercollegiate Tennis Association began formally in 1956 when J.D. Morgan, who was the tennis coach at UCLA and then the athletic director at UCLA, founded the Coaches Association and served as the first president of the Coaches Association for 4 years.
And when you played a match, if things were going badly against you, you didn't quit or you didn't lose drive, because otherwise you were going to face JD, and none of us wanted to do that.
Some of the leaders were the great coaches, meaning J.D. Morgan of UCLA, George Tolley at USC, and even my old coach, Bob Rinker at Stanford. All were early presidents of the ITCA, Intercollegiate Tennis Coaches Association.
In the beginning, we were the ITCA, Intercollegiate Tennis Coaches Association, and later became the ITA, Intercollegiate Tennis Association.
It really started to mature when David Benjamin, the great president for the ITA, came along. It was incorporated in 1978, and Dave was elected president in 1979. He was the executive director and served a tremendously long time from 1983 to 2016. He oversaw the coming of Title IX and women's tennis 1976, and incorporated that into what had been really a men's coaches club. and did so many other things.
When you let his mind think about something for a while, he comes up with things that we haven't thought about. And the joke that we always said about David was that he's smart enough to let us think we're actually being part of the solution, but he knew where he was going. He was just waiting for us to catch up.
Basically, we had no board of directors, and we had no real plan. I didn't inherit a plan or a structure, but I felt that we needed to get organized, basically, and it would make a lot of sense to bring together 8 or 10 of the coaches who were very highly respected and very interested, as we all were, in growing college tennis. And so I mentioned that in passing, that I felt a meeting like this could be really valuable to Nick Bollettieri, who at the time was starting his academy in Longboat Key in the Bradenton, Sarasota area. And Nick said, well, I'd be glad to host it if you want to bring in 8 or 10 of the key college coaches. I'd love to meet them and be willing to arrange for lodging for them over a couple days. And we had several days that were very, very, very valuable in discussing all of the different thoughts, issues, concerns, opportunities that we felt as an organization we should address. We discussed the question of women's tennis and would it work well if the ITCA were to involve membership in both men and women's tennis. And it was very controversial. Not everyone felt that it would be good to have a co-ed organization. And in fact, most of the other coaches associations had separate men's and women's organizations. Each of the coaches as members of the executive committee had a lot of interesting ideas, and a number of these ideas reached fruition over the years that followed.
The ITA published an annual yearbook which highlighted the happenings of the year before. I was the editor with help from the ITA office. The yearbook included tournament results as well as an extensive awards program.
In 1981 or 2, we elected members of women's college tennis to join the board of directors along with the men, and we initiated several national women's college events administered by the ITCA. The very first one took place at Myrtle Beach. It was the Women's All-American Tournament.
So when the ITA, which had been in existence for the men, and David came to the women, there was a little bit of, hey, we want, we're our own group and we want to be strong. We want to do things our way. We don't want to join a men's group and just get taken over. So there was that atmosphere and feeling of wanting independence, but also wanting a strong organization specifically for tennis. The women needed to think about it a little bit. And what was tremendous is the way David Benjamin and the existing group came to the women and said, look, we think we're better together and there's a greater strength and we can do more and we'll let you do things the way you want to do things. So we decided our own rules, our own format, yet we went with the men. And it was a tremendous step forward that went remarkably smoothly from the beginning.
What did that do? It opened the doors for a lot of us to be on committees, to speak at conventions, to get our voice out there. We started sports science, and that was Jan Rogan and Kathy Toon, who were the coaches at Cal, at Berkeley. And then a lot of us that then became coaches on different committees. So, we're, I don't want to say we're kind of the organizers lots of times. And I've seen this happen with tournament after tournament running NCAA events or ITA events, is that we're the ones that kind of the people behind the scenes. Sometimes there's a guy at the head, but now it's not that. It's the women at the head, and it's good.
Thing that's fantastic is, there's so many now young female coaches that have taken over college programs, which has been really a thrill for me to see so many of these young women now doing a great job leading college programs throughout the country.
We inherited something where basically we had a coaches group the ITA or the ITCA, the Intercollegiate Tennis Coaches Association. And he saw right away, no, this needs to be much bigger than that, and it can have a much bigger influence. And he had the same kind of farsightedness in terms of incorporating the women into it, realizing that we would have much, much bigger lobbying power if we presented as a group rather than each group doing its own thing and being divided.
Although American college tennis began in 1883, just a few years after American tennis began, the relationship between American tennis and the USTA at that point, the USLTA and the ITA, covered 3/4 of a century, but very little changed over that period of time. The very best American tennis players almost all played college tennis and represented the United States in the Davis Cup competition. And much of this was due to the fact, in order to play on the Davis Cup team, in order to play in what now is considered the Grand Slam championships, the tennis player had to be an amateur. And in order to qualify and be eligible to play in those events, the only way for a young player was to also play college tennis. And so the greatest players over all those years, Gardner Malloy, Vic Seixas, Tony Trabert, all were amateur players. They all, with very few exceptions, played college tennis.
College players competed nationally. They played in Wimbledon. They played in the U.S. Open. They were good players. They were seeded. They did well. Sometimes they won the events. They played Davis Cup.
It was the era of amateur tennis. So I played those tournaments as an amateur, as a college player. And in fact, it was really interesting because the draw, for instance, of the US Open was made up mainly of college players. There was a really difficult period of time to explain. There were contract pros, there were independent pros, there were amateurs, and this took a while to really sort out the way the tour is today.
See, we were called tennis bums because we were living off the tennis illegally according to the rules. And so, like I say, we were called tennis bums, but the players of today are heroes, and they're playing for money. And we weren't supposed to play for money. If we played for money, we were bums.
The big change that affected American tennis, international tennis, and college tennis was the decision in 1968 to allow professionals to compete in the Grand Slam events. And this began the open era of tennis. But although you could at that point play on the Davis Cup team, play in the Grand Slam events, in order to play college tennis, you had to be an amateur as defined by the NCAA, which was the governing body of college sports.
When, with all the under the table payments being paid to tennis players, Amateurism it was called, and it truly was for the top players, it really turned the world over.
Of course, one of the great moments in tennis, certainly American tennis, I think in tennis in general, was when Arthur Ashe won the U.S. Open in 1968. That was the first year of prize money, the U.S. Open. It wasn't the U.S. National Championships anymore. Bob and I actually won the doubles there too, but it was a very special moment to see.
The other development that had an enormous impact on college tennis was the arrival of indoor tennis courts. The first 2 indoor tennis courts on a college campus were built in 1964. Until the indoor tennis courts arrived on college campuses, most of the most outstanding college players went to the tennis programs in in California, where they could play all year round, and in Florida. But once many colleges began to build indoor tennis courts, this created a real sense of excitement and parity among college tennis programs, a whole new element for college tennis, and a lot of great excitement in the early 70s for the sport of tennis, highlighted, of course, by the famous Battle of the Sexes, which was in 1973, and which also ended up having a major impact on women's college tennis.
What it did is, first of all, it got so many people to be introduced to tennis. You could not get on a tennis court the day after that match. And that's why we had that huge growth in our sport, is because of that match. Women would come up to me and their self-confidence was so much better, they said, after seeing that match. A lot of them didn't have any goals for their life, didn't know what they're going to do with their lives, and seeing that match changed everything. Sometimes tears in their eyes would say, I never have thought about my daughter. And seeing that match, it's like, I want my daughter to have the same dreams and the same aspirations as my boys. So it's changed my life forever and how I'm going to raise my daughter or daughters. When I played Bobby Riggs, I wanted to protect Title IX, which had been passed just the year before, June 23rd, 1972. What was Title IX about? It was changing the quota in the classrooms, but it also has the word activity in the 37 words. And that word, activity, was left in. The co-authors couldn't decide whether to leave it in or take it out. But by leaving it in, it allowed women to get athletic scholarships to college for the first time. And so that matched influenced people to really go for it. If they were thinking about maybe going out for tennis, they certainly did, particularly the girls and women.
At that point in time, with so much money, sponsorship interest in tennis, television interest in tennis, college tennis began to change over that next 10-year period, which went from 1968, Stan Smith winning the NCAA championship and being the very last American male player to have spent 4 years at college, graduated from USC, and then went on to be #1 player in the world and win Wimbledon and the US Open. If we fast forward 10 more years, John McEnroe, who was a freshman at Stanford University and had hesitated about going to Stanford because that summer of 1977, unexpectedly, John McEnroe, who was not even the #1 junior in the United States, reached the semifinals of Wimbledon, where he lost in 4 sets to Jimmy Connors. So John McEnroe in 1978 won the NCAA singles title, beating John Sadri in the finals. And John McEnroe was, up until today, the last American male player to have attended at least 1 year of college tennis and then gone on to great success, winning Grand Slam titles and having a fabulous professional career. So over that 10-year period, as more and more sponsorship money, television money moved to focus on American and international tennis, for the very first time, a major question became, should the most outstanding young players go to college and play college tennis as amateurs because college tennis, because of NCAA rules, you had to be an amateur to play college tennis, or should they skip college and go right onto the pro tour? Again, that question didn't even exist until open tennis, and every year over the next decades became a bigger and bigger issue.
You know, where you used to have people like Stan Smith and Arthur Ashe and people go to college, it was starting to be less so. And even the USTA had some years of confusion as far as thinking, well, you know, maybe we have to get like Courier and Agassi and Sampras, they all turn pro. And so maybe we should suggest everybody turn pro and college becomes kind of this desert of development, which it never became. So no matter how little support at that time, and the USTA has gotten much better with understanding the role of college tennis. Today we look at it, and now it's become a beacon for people from all over the world. We're looking at people who are coming in from other countries and seeing that this is a legitimate pathway for them to prepare themselves for professional careers if they're good enough.
I think people, when they first started turning pro, realized, a lot of people, when they started doing it in a big level, that it wasn't that easy. And you might earn $100,000 a year, but your expenses are so high, you certainly couldn't afford a coach, you couldn't afford a trainer. It was a pretty lonely world. So I think kids started going back to college a little more and started developing their game a little more. And it's turned out to be that it's not a bad choice.
College tennis is a big part of this footprint that you take your kid from 10 years old all the way up to the pro level. There's a clear pathway, or another option would be a better way of putting it, that the educational model comes through and can be a big part of that.
The Bryan twins were there for a couple of years, the greatest doubles team in history. And again, I think they would be the first to tell anyone that it was one of the greatest growing experiences in their life, not just the classroom, but out of the classroom.
Right now, you've got two former college players in Danielle Collins and Emma Navarro, both in the top 15 in the world. Both were NCAA champions.
By staying in college, they're getting a little more mature. The ball's being hit so hard. They're getting a little stronger. They're taking more advantage of their physical training in college.
They have something besides the experience of just playing tennis. In college, they have education that they can take with them, which is a hell of an insurance policy that sometimes I think we overlook.
In college, you're with a team. You've got a good coaching staff. You've got unbelievable training opportunities to improve your game as well as to get an education.
And as we're seeing now, there's even more players recently coming out of the college ranks and making it in pro tennis. So it's great to see. We run our tennis academy, my brother and I, here in New York City, and we encourage all our high level kids to pursue college and play college tennis. And if it just so happens I have a chance to become pros, that's gravy. But the college experience and the ability to play and get a scholarship at these great universities. There's so many great coaches, so many great facilities. And I know all the coaches and programs appreciate what the ITA has done for so many years.
There really were not college tennis rules. Most of the rules as such were rules that were in friend at the court by the USTA, and in many cases they didn't really address problems that come up in college tennis. When I first became president and when I was coaching at Princeton, it was up to the home team in a team competition where the match was played, indoors or outdoors, what balls were used, what officials were used. As a board of directors, we agreed that we needed to create ITA rules governing college tennis.
Yeah, there were no rules regulating college tennis at a national level. There were some conference rules, so forth, and And the reason is the NCAA in those days, its purpose was, as it affected college tennis, was only to run the NCAA tournament. And particularly, there was no dual match format for the NCAA tournament. So it really had very little to do with it, with what we now have today. For example, the no let rule that was suggested by Harvard's Dave Fish. There's no reason to have a let on a serve when you don't have one on a ground stroke.
As Einstein said, if at first an idea it doesn't seem absurd, it has no chance.
No ad scoring we introduced. It brought a lot of excitement into the game.
No ad scoring shortens matches, and college tennis matches back in the day where you played 6 singles and 3 doubles completely. You could have a match that lasted 5 or 6 hours.
That no one has the 4 or 5 hours that you can sit and watch a college tennis match. So as we worked on this and wanted to become something that TV would be attracted to, we had to shorten the time. A long college match now, probably 2.5 hours.
I think giving it a 2.5, 3 hour window gives us a much better opportunity to showcase our great sport to our fans. It's fast paced, exciting, and I think it's only enhanced our game. So it's been a great addition.
Now we have something that's really, really fun. So we were hugely criticized for changing formats and things, but in the end, we had to respond to the market. The market said college tennis was just too long. People don't, in this climate, in this environment, people don't sit for that long.
There were no national college tournaments. Now you have the ITA All-American, the national indoor singles and doubles. We had a national clay courts for many years. There's a national team indoors, ITA regionals, ITA team indoor qualifiers, summer circuit events. None of that was in play. None of it existed. And when the college season ended, that was it. And you were kind of on your own.
When I was playing in college, we had a couple tournaments that were considered college tournaments. And then there was the conference championships and the NCAA championships. And that was about it. But with the evolving of the ITA and the schedule of the All-American tournament, the indoor championships, the team championships, the individual championships, that were a couple were really sponsored by the NCAA, but most of the others were established by the ITA and gave college players the opportunity to have their special events. And so the players would train for those events. We even had a national clay court for the college players, which was around for a couple of years. A lot of the international players actually liked that a lot because a lot of them grew up on clay. So the evolving of the game through the ITA and college tennis has really grown the game. And in fact, it's actually stronger now than ever.
I'm not sure college tennis would be where it has gotten today without them. They've had some challenging times, but they have been the voice in saving a lot of college programs over the years, or getting college programs back when they've been lost or cut for various reasons. It is a non-revenue sport for these colleges and universities. So it is imperative that the ITA continues to be strong and be a strong voice and an advocate for the coaches and for the players alike.
So the ITA has done, I think, a fabulous job in navigating those waters and making college tennis as successful as it can be.
The ITCA felt it would be very important to have an annual coaches convention so that you could bring coaches from all over the country together, bring in speakers, so we can exchange ideas, and it could be a good opportunity for the coaches to get to know each other better away from their teams and grow as educators. In the early years, Nick Bollettieri, Dennis Vandermeer, Vic Braden, and a number of illustrious tennis personalities giving talks and sessions.
And as coaches, and we really sort of, just spent a lot of time figuring out different rules we wanted to play by, and basically, the format of college tennis and how we wanted it run. And I think, the fact that we had the coaches on these committees who were very committed and, got along well and all wanted what was in the best interest of college tennis, I think it really helped us formulate what we now have is ITA rules that the NCAA really enjoys us sort of being on the forefront of creating our own playing rules. I think has been instrumental.
It was a chance for professional development, trade shows, of course. People could come in with their ball machines and their new balls or whatever it might be. And of course, the networking and collaboration opportunities were phenomenal.
And that was a huge step forward in not only coaches' education, which is how it was set up for, but just a chance for the coaches to get together and see each other, talk to each other, and learn from each other. Huge educational experience, but also a chance for us to get to know each other. Instead of just meeting once when we were competing against each other, we got a chance to sit down and have lunch together, to sit through these seminars, talk about it afterwards. And there really was a much greater camaraderie and a sense that we're all in this together. We all have the same motives to make our teams better, not just as players, but as people. And it was a really refreshing reset for the coaches. And we always came away with a sense of excitement going into the next year of how we were going to make our programs better. We were going to do more for our players and do more for ourselves.
And this actually has improved and improved and improved. I'm so impressed with how Tim Russell and staff have taken it to a new generation and a new level. They've really been very helpful. I've had the opportunity to attend several of them, not just as a presenter, but also as a learner. You always go as a learner, and every time I come back with more knowledge and more friends and more networking opportunities in the future, which helped me in my profession a great deal.
And then Larry Turville said, we really should have a coaches tournament with prize money. So we agreed, the board of directors, that it was important for us to create a coaches prize money tournament as partly an incentive. In terms of awards, the Wilson Company decided to sponsor a Coach of the Year award. And George Tolley suggested that we create a Osuna Sportsmanship Award. Rafael Osuna was a wonderful sportsman. We created the Arthur Ashe Award. We also created the Player of the Year Award and Scholar Athlete Awards. And the purpose of all of these awards was to promote college tennis, the programs, the coaches, the players, and over the years expanded enormously to be awards, in each case given out regionally, nationally, to all of the different divisions.
It was a IT back then, the ITCA Rookie of the Year. So I can remember going back, I was at Northwestern as a rookie and going to the U.S. Open and receiving that Rookie of the Year award. They used to have a nice luncheon every year at the U.S. Open. Arthur Ashe was there to greet all the college players at the luncheon, and I received my award from him at that time.
There just weren't that many awards for college tennis other than the tennis-based All-American team. But the ITA started a number of programs, whether it was for sportsmanship or for leadership. In addition, and these awards went down to the regional level. So for a smaller school, we were part of the Ivy League, or whether it's a Boston college that can't compete athletically with the Stanfords, they had individual players that deserve this tremendous recognition. And So you could win an award at a regional level. And again, it's a chance to celebrate that within your university and get that recognition. And then you qualify for the national award. And to see these players from across the country, not just the elite schools, but opening up to everybody, the awards program was a tremendous, wealth of media attention and proper recognition for our student athletes that, went beyond just pure tennis.
Stan Smith and Margie Smith named this award. It made it the David Benjamin Achievement Award, and it's given to an individual who played college tennis and then did something, we want to say did something with their life. They were something famous afterwards.
For the past 29 years, I've been proud to present the ITA's Achievement Award to distinguished past participants in the world of college varsity tennis who have achieved excellence in their chosen career paths. My wife Margie and I were so enamored by the incredible array of winners that in 2015 we chose to endow this award in the name of longstanding ITA Executive Director David A. Benjamin.
The ITA rankings program grew and grew in importance and expansion. But once again, the rankings was a way to create awareness and promote the achievements of the teams, because there were ITCA rankings for teams and singles and doubles, men and women.
Started with national rankings, then went to regional rankings, and the system gets a little better each year. Everyone's always complaining about where they are at certain times of the year, but the system itself works out, and it tends to level out over the course of time.
Taken together, the administering of the rankings, of the award system, of the rules, a yearbook, convention, what evolved was essentially the role that the ITA grew into of being the governing body of college tennis. I believe that there are very few coaches associations in our country that are also the governing body of that sport. But certainly the ITCA had a pioneering role and remains a very important role in serving as the governing body of college tennis.
We're also responsible for ensuring that there is actually a vibrant future for college tennis. If you actually were to go on the ITA's website and read our vision statement, it talks about a vision where college tennis is one of the most exciting and vibrant college sports, but also our commitment to ensuring its success over time.
The ITA was the most successful coaches or sports organization aside from the money, where if you basketball or football, but no other groups were even close to as effective at impacting the course of legislation.
It's basically our rules. So if there's anybody to blame, it's us, the coaches. So, and like I said, we all get along well. So I think we're really happy with where we are right now in college tennis.
I received a call from Jack Kramer, probably the most important person in the world of tennis. And he said, I had just had lunch with Bjorn Ahlstrom, the president of Volvo North America. And we were discussing a professional event Volvo was involved with. And I mentioned to Bjorn Ahlstrom that he should give you a call because the ITCA is doing some interesting projects and Volvo might have some interest in that as well. At that point, I think the sponsorship fee that we were looking for was about $40,000. We had a very pleasant lunch, and Bjorn Ahlstrom and Rick Dowden, again, the executive vice president, said we'd like to do the All-American tournament. Meanwhile, at the same time period, a week or two earlier, I had had a meeting at Rolex. There's a gentleman named Jimmy Van Allen. He went to Cambridge University in England. He was a Newport millionaire. Jimmy Van Allen was very interested in, almost obsessed by, was the scoring system. And he created something called the Van Allen Simplified Scoring System. It didn't last very long, except for college tennis, where it was adopted as the scoring system from 1973 to 1988. and then many years later was brought back again. So when I called him on my annual mission to try to see if he might give us some money, he said, look, I feel really bad that I haven't been able to do that, but I'll introduce you to my good friend, the president of Rolex, whose name was Rene Danton, and I think he might be interested in some of your projects, and I suggest you go meet with him. And I had a good couple-hour meeting with them. By then, Volvo actually has agreed to sponsor the All-American, but we'd be delighted if you would be interested in sponsoring our national ITA singles and doubles indoors. And we worked out an agreement, and I think initially that first agreement was in the range of $50,000. And again, it went extremely well, and over the period of the next 10 years, that $50,000 grew to well over $1 million of support for college tennis.
This is where the ITA and David were very impactful of bringing these sponsorships in, moving these championships to different parts of the country, allowing basically all of the divisions to be able to play championships from regionals on, that it would not just be playing a dual match and playing the NCAA championships. As I got more involved in the ITA, we started looking for sponsors as we took over the All-American. And there was opportunity, since we were the only school in tennis sponsored by Polo Ralph Lauren, to approach the hierarchy there and try to get them involved with at the national level with college tennis. They became involved with the U.S. Open, and now they're involved with Wimbledon. But that's how polo got into tennis.
One element that we felt was very important was that there should be an ITA College Hall of Fame to honor all of the great players and coaches over 150 years who had been exceptional in terms of their achievements. After having these discussions, but realizing that to build a Hall of Fame, you just can't go out and build it, and we did not have significant funds to do this on our own. It turned out that Kenny Rogers had married an Athens, Georgia native, Marianne Gordon was her name, and as a teenager, she had actually sold lemonade at the Georgia matches, and so she grew up knowing the University of Georgia and the team and Dan McGill very well. So Kenny, who was a decent tennis player and maybe with one of the players on the team, rallied a little and then came over to thank Coach McGill for letting him hit tennis balls on the Georgia courts. And Dan, who was a great entrepreneur and never missed a moment, said, here's a Georgia t-shirt, Georgia tennis t-shirt, a Bulldog t-shirt. And Kenny thanked him a lot. And maybe a week or two later came back to visit again and said hi to Kenny Rogers and hit a couple tennis balls and then said to Dan McGill, it was so nice of you to let us hit here, and I know how important your team and you are to my wife over the years, and I really appreciate your gift of the t-shirt. What can I do for you in return? And then once again Dan said, well, we'd love to have a College Hall of Fame right here, right in this stadium area. And we would love to do this, and there's a wonderful history of college tennis that should be honored of the players and coaches. And Kenny said, well, how much do you need?
I thought maybe he'd give $10,000 or $15,000. He gave the entire $200,000 for the building.
The Hall of Fame has become quite important for the players and something very special as they look back on their college careers to be recognized as one of the best players in college.
So it's just a tremendously long list of people who had not only a tremendous influence in collegiate tennis, which is what they're mostly chosen for, but have gone on and done amazing things throughout the world in terms of tennis and in terms of service to the sport. David recognized this and was really instrumental, along with Dan McGill, in getting the Hall of Fame established, and it's a great tribute to them as you walk into the building now. There are over 270 players and coaches and contributors have been honored over the years.
We have in this museum now over 2,000 photographs of historical significance, all relating to college tennis, and over 400 rackets, different rackets, different models, all of them, the largest collection of tennis rackets of any museum in the United States. And in 1984, it was dedicated. And each year thereafter, we've had the annual induction ceremonies of the greats of college tennis. Most of them were great players, some were great coaches, and some were those who have been tremendous contributors to the game of college tennis.
The Hall of Fame is a way to record our history. It's not just a way to acknowledge people's successes. But when you have people from D3, people that I would never have otherwise heard about, and I get a chance to understand what they've done, and in many cases be humbled by the contributions that they've made to the game.
The three people that impacted college tennis the most to me were Dan McGill, David Benjamin, and Dick Gould. And Dick Gould showed us how to do it. Dan McGill showed us how to promote it and make people like it. And David showed us how to run it.
Inauguration was in 1983, and Dan arranged a pro-am at the beginning with Kenny Rogers playing with Dennis Ralston and other celebrities. And Dan always would say that that T-shirt was the best investment he ever made. Meanwhile, as we were now co-ed, we felt that there should also be a women's college hall of fame. There wasn't really room in the area in Georgia to have a much bigger building that could do both. So Millie West, who was originally the women's coach and then the women's athletic director at William and Mary, she and I began to talk about creating a women's college hall of fame.
She was this little fire plug who was a coach, tennis coach at William and Mary. She ran Whiteman Cup at William and Mary. She just was the person, then became women's athletic director. And she said, we need a hall of fame.
It happens that Millie was very close, almost like an aunt to Mark McCormick, who, of course, created IMG, represented almost all of the top women on the tour and a lot of the men also. And Mark agreed that he would provide the funds to build a beautiful indoor center at William and Mary.
And his wife, Betsy Nagelson, who played on the pro circuit. And they were excited to do something, loved Millie. Millie was a great fundraiser, got the community interested, and they built the building that houses now the Hall of Fame.
And the ITCA Women's College Hall of Fame was inaugurated in 1995. And again, thanks to the generosity of Mark McCormick and his wife, Betsy Nagelson, who had been a player on the tour, and particularly thanks to and from the president's office on down, the whole community was very supportive. Again, has been a great success and continues until today.
The selection committee has done an amazing job because, Hall of Fames tend to become very political. Not that this one is without politics, but I think it's one of the better Hall of Fames in existence because they're really looking at what should the profile be for an inductee, whether it's player or coach, and what kind of contribution have they made. I think it's been fantastic. And I think it's helped preserve the history of the game in a very important way.
The NCAA was and still remains a very powerful institution overseeing college sports, although many changes over many years. So, as the chair of the NCAA Tennis Committee, I felt it was very important for the ITCA to develop as strong a relationship as possible with the NCAA administrators and NCAA staff.
David Benjamin is the guy that brought the ITA and the NCAA together. And pretty soon, after his ascendancy into basically becoming the czar of college tennis, the NCAA committee started to take its lead from the ITA and actually started to listen to the coaches. And now they've adopted our rules for the NCAA tournament, and so now there's a very healthy relationship.
The NCAA's focus with tennis was primarily and almost solely with the NCAA Tennis Championships. And the role of the ITCA was to provide suggestions, but not make final decisions as to the host sites of the NCAA Championships. But on a legislative level, there were a number of issues over a period of years that had a direct impact on college tennis, and where the ITCA, through the relationships that were developed, was able to be fairly successful in addressing concerns that impacted on college tennis. The NCAA had generic rules about what was considered dates of competition, and each team and it was only allowed to play a certain number of matches during the college season. But then the big question was, would those matches, team matches, as part of a national ITA indoor team championship, count against the limits of matches that the teams were permitted to play? We were successful in having both the men and women's indoor team championships given an exemption counted against the number of competitions permitted during the year. The NCAA did not permit any professionalism, and accepting prize money was not permissible in a sport like tennis. So if a player in the summer were to play in a tournament that had prize money and did well enough so they won even just $10, if they accepted that money as prize money, they would not be eligible to play college tennis. And the coaches as a group felt that was really not fair, because often the expenses of playing in a tournament, just traveling by car, staying in a hotel, often could be several $100s. And eventually, the ITA was able to have a rule passed that in the sport of tennis, and only in the sport of tennis, that a student athlete could accept as prize money up to $10,000 without, this is again before they began college, they could accept up to $10,000 in prize money winnings without losing their amateur status.
We all know that tennis isn't like football and basketball as far as the NCAA is concerned. So the ITA has done, I think, a fabulous job in navigating those waters and making college tennis as successful as it can be.
In 1980, the ITA published its first collegiate singles rankings. Was sponsored by Michelob Light. It ranked in Division I men the 50 top players. Out of those 50 players, there were only 2 who were not American. That was 1980. Fast forward 6-7 years, 30 were from other countries. And this was very, very controversial. These players got scholarships, and so literally thousands of parents became more and more upset and felt this was very, very unfair.
And I believe the Sears Directors Cup changed all of this, because they started to rank all the schools in order of their finish in NCAA play. And all of a sudden, athletic directors found that they were being ranked just like their coaches were being ranked. They didn't like it. There are only so many good players, and if you're somewhere in the hinterlands and no one's heard of your school, your chances of getting the next great American player were very small. So a number of coaches went overseas and And it had a big impact on college tennis. The first thing it did was it raised the level of play. All of a sudden, there were more outstanding players. And that was good for the best college players because they got better competition.
You know, at the very, very high level, if you're going to be on a national team, what's the first thing a national team does? It takes you overseas so that you mix with other players to get better, because our sport is played internationally.
Can we fault young coaches who know that their pathway to getting to their dream job and taking care of their family is to produce a successful team? We have to be realistic about what this does. So these better players help all of us get better. How many is too many? That's the question.
Our conclusion was it had to depend on the school. The school had the right, public or private, to make a decision who they would admit or not to the school, but that we couldn't create a blanket rule that would impact on this issue. It's been a very major issue, very controversial. Literally hundreds, if not thousands, of articles written about it by tennis journalists all around the country.
It was important for both the international players and the Americans on my team. It was a great experience for both. I think they learned from each other. Also, all the international players that I had were all excellent students because their secondary education is so much more demanding. They had no problems.
Over the years, some people have questioned whether there's too many international players playing college tennis. I think every college president and athletic director recognizes that not only are international players great for our sport from a competitive landscape, but also our world has become flat, as people say.
I happen to think it's been great for college tennis. Of course, there will always be people and parents that say, well, my kid didn't get a scholarship because, it got taken by an international player. That's really at the highest level. I think there's a lot of universities out there, whatever level you're at, whether it's Division I, Division III, where you can play a very high level tennis. We've even seen some players play D3 tennis and become, professional players.
The issue of international players also impacted on two other key issues that were collegiate issues. Over a period of 10, 15 years, there were roughly 300 men's tennis programs at the college level that were dropped. Now, one of the reasons that these programs were dropped was the impact of Title IX in college tennis and other sports. It was called proportionality, that the school had to be able to show that that roughly the same number of women were playing varsity sports as men. And in terms of budgets, many schools couldn't afford to do that without, again, dropping some of the men's programs for those budgetary reasons. One of the issues that came up repeatedly was, well, one of the reasons that a number of these programs are being dropped by the athletic directors in the schools is that a number of the players on the men's teams are from other countries. And that creates a negative feeling about the program and makes it easier to drop the program, because the people that are the student athletes, the tennis players on that program who are not going to be able to play college tennis often are from other countries. The program to try to impact on this was, again, we called it the advocacy program. It was extremely well organized, again, great collaboration with the USTA and the ITA.
We fought hard against that with the ITA in the ITA space to try to speak to the leadership of those universities or colleges that are considering or have dropped a program, and not necessarily put pressure on them, but to just point out the once you drop a program, it's very challenging to bring it back. Are there ways that we can help financially, raise money for that particular program, even if they have to cut parts of their budget, there's usually ways to keep that program.
The whole issue of international players, which we just discussed, affected the drop programs, but it also affected player development. The USTA had no program, no committees concerning player development until 1986. David Markin, who his family owned Checkers motor companies and became the president and chairman of the board of the USTA, chaired a committee on player development, and the decision was made that the USTA should create a program and a concern about player development. And the reality behind that was that up until the early 80s, the top USTA players, Connors and McEnroe, were among the top players in the world. And as the decade progressed, they were getting older, and the worry on the part of the USTA board was, where are the young players going to come from? The other countries' tennis federations had very sophisticated player development programs. Ironically, just at that time, Michael Chang, Jim Courier, Pete Sampras, and Agassi, often called the best generation of American tennis, they just were emerging on the scene. None of those four people had any involvement with USTA player development because it hadn't existed. But for the next 8 or 10 years, they dominated the scene. And from the point of view of the ITA and most of the coaches, there was great concern that as the player development program, the USTA player development program, with a staff of 10 with a large budget, took shape, that a number of outstanding young players at 14, 15, 16 years old were being encouraged not to play college tennis, but to focus entirely, as in all of the other countries, on their tennis development with, again, the USTA play development staff.
The USTA formed its national team, and they picked the elite tennis players, and they paid all their expenses. They took them to the Grand Slams. They provided coaching pretty much year round. They had clinics and workshops for the players that they felt gave the U.S. the best chance to be successful as professionals. There developed an attitude really on their part, I believe, and I'm a little prejudiced, but where they kind of look down on college tennis, and if somebody wanted to turn pro, they would want to put more of their time into that person. And if they were going to go to college, there was almost a little bit of a stigma. You're not real serious about your tennis if you're going to go to college. David made it a point to get to know the USTA president and its leadership, try to involve us so that we were included. College players were put on some of the summer travel teams and so forth, and he involved us. Again, that was more of a player development thing, but it came down from the USTA to player development.
You know how the USTA operates. You have a new president every 2 years and a new board, and so the relationships that David had produced and all the committees that he was on and appointing coaches to those committees, there was always a tie there. But as when John Vagosa became president, the ties started to become stronger. And I think as of right now, it's the strongest that it's ever been.
But I believe it is still a very strong relationship between the ITA, the ITF, and the USTA because it's tennis. So college tennis, there's a great college pathway between the USTA player development and the ITA. I know that player development works very closely with the ITA in making sure that our young players are using the college pathway system to develop.
We say that college tennis is ultimately about helping to develop championship human beings on the court and off the court. And part of our advocacy is to ensure that college tennis programs are embedded on their campus and in their communities.
Because the USTA obviously and the ITA have the interest of tennis at heart, and college tennis obviously is the specific role of the ITA. The USTA has to look at multiple avenues: junior tennis, adult tennis, high level tennis, and recreational tennis. So I think they found that niche where they work together. Again, because the NCAA is understandably focused on the larger revenue sports that help support sports like tennis. It's very important that the ITA and the USTA sort of work hand in hand, and I think they've done that.
I think with time, there was more understanding on the part of the board and the staff of the USTA that college tennis should be looked at as a great opportunity to develop young players.
Well, I always say college tennis will help them make the pros because it's a way of continuing to develop. You got to develop your game to the fullest that it can be, because if you're not developing, you won't be a very good professional tennis player. So having done both myself and understanding the rigorous grind that the professional tennis tour can be, whether you're on the WTA tour or the ATP tour, it's great to go to college for whether you can go for 4 years and get your degree, which I highly recommend, or if you're there for a couple years to continue to develop not just your tennis skills, but as an individual and to grow and mature.
The reason that varsity tennis has been transformed is because of David's vision, brilliance, creativity, passion, persistence, and tireless work for almost 4 decades. We owe David a debt of gratitude. In short, David Benjamin is a national tennis and educational treasure. He has selflessly and tirelessly dedicated his immense talent, insightfulness, and energy to bring college tennis, its coaches, and its student athletes to the greatest heights, both on and off the court.
We competed often. By that, I mean, we had different views of the way things should be done. But particularly with my relationship with David, it was always collegial. There was always an exchange of ideas. What came out of our interactions and our engagement always, in my mind, I might not have been happy completely with it. He might not have been happy, but it was better for the game.
I took the initiative of discussing with the board of directors in 2013-14 that I felt that it would be important to find the right person to continue our programs and to take over leadership of the ITA.
And so we met with someone who was a headhunter, and he said the chances of success of finding a person who will take over that job is 0. Tim Russell was sort of our dark horse because he absolutely lives and breathes his enthusiasm for tennis.
We were very, very fortunate to be able to find Tim Russell, with whom I had worked closely on different projects for almost 20 years. And Tim agreed to be the CEO, and then John Vigosin, again, with whom I had worked on projects in his role with the USTA, agreed to be chairman of the board. And I felt that looking to the future, we had in Tim Russell and John Vigosin, we were putting together a great leadership team. And I felt a great deal of confidence in passing my baton to Tim Russell, who had been a conductor of Philharmonic orchestras, so he actually knows a lot about batons.
And so we were incredibly fortunate that these guys could have different visions and each add their own signature to the ITA, which they each did, and still come out with this high quality people.
Everyone who knows and loves college tennis, our collective gratitude for David Benjamin, who really was the architect of what our sport is today. And it's been a great joy and pleasure and privilege for me to build on the astonishing foundation that David created. And we're all kind of just caretakers, and all of us have a fiduciary responsibility to try to leave our sport and our association better than we found it. And one of my personal goals has always been, to think about working beyond our tenure. And a guy like David certainly did that, and he left us a sport that's just unrivaled. And I feel proud to have taken what he built and moved it forward. And I know that the people who become the next leaders will do the same.
The ITA is our organization. It's not their organization. They're not serving us. We're all together in this.